Yeah, it's a good moment for me to start taking over and presenting, given my voice, but please bear with me sounding like Marge Simpson. Um, so we have the agenda today. First of all, welcome back. Thanks for your attendance and your interest. So we'll give you, as last time, a short update on our progress, what our next steps and plans are. And with an additional emphasis that we will want more detailed feedback soon. So since the last time, we've evaluated a lot of possible scenarios. So we listened to what many of you had to say. We had meetings with offline with people as well. Sort of ran through these scenarios and to see what would be, like what kind of end solution would there be for that's workable for modules from a generation perspective, but also from a self-containedness or having MVS island, or however we call it, right, where people want to say, okay, we have this module that really should be seen as a self-contained thing, and we don't want it to interact with MVS with other things in any way. So that's, we try to build an understanding of like the problems people ran into, and to come to a solution on how to fix that. So now we're working towards the next release. I'll talk about that next. And then also we had, Daniel did a whole bunch of work on the central registry implementation in parallel, which can happen independently of this. So the outline of our idea. So what we wanted to have as a goal for a solution, and we think we have at least some good thoughts around how that would look like, but to simplify package semantics. So unlike last time when at least I didn't see a good solution for it, we do have now a good approach, actually thanks to the inputs partially of Cedric, on how to get rid of gen and user, or at least how to represent it in a more standard way. Also in a way that it's compatible with foreseen in actual user scenarios, right? So some of the solutions that we had weren't really jiving very well with some of the user, problems. And it is also compatible with the benefits that Q provide. It's very easy to find a simple solution that sort of, like removes a lot of the benefits that Q will give down the line. So we want to optimize for a uniform ecosystem. So we think that if generation of stuff is as standardized as possible, if packages are as uniform as possible, that just helps the ecosystem. There's a lot of things we can leverage if we do that. So I mentioned the bootstrapping problem last time, which I argued wouldn't allow us to get really use of gen and user, because they're usually have this one bang many dependencies kind of thing. So this is a thing I think that's solved now. So and the main reason why we don't need gen and user anymore. And then also we want to have a solution where most people wouldn't even have to run go get go, queue get go, or queue generate or whatever, right? Like generation in most cases should be, instead of generating, you should be able to use a equivalent queue module that already exists, or not. And then again, these dependency islands we're talking about, we need to have some support for that. Around it, we need to make sure that these problems or these solutions are consistent with solutions in that space, and we believe that is the case as well. So what we plan now is for the next Q release to have module support, but focusing only on private registries for now. So that way we can release this independently of a central registry. So gen, user, and package will still be supported, but only in the main module. So an analogy for that is vendoring in Go, right? Like so right now, vendoring, you can have vendored packages in a module, but they will not be accessible if you depend on such a module. So the semantics is quite similar, and this is fairly easy to support. So it's not like a huge distraction to try to support this for now. It might be cumbersome for the users in some cases, but it's at least we'll keep backwards compatibility now until we, for many cases, until we find out what is a good migration path for users. So some guidelines for creating modules. Right now, it's the tooling will allow you to do pretty much anything. It will allow you to create use any kind of name for a module. So anybody who's used Gen QGetGo before knows that the generated modules are basically squatting on a namespace that is not in any of our control, or very likely not. And this is potentially a problem, right? So one of the things to recommend is, okay, if you're gonna use the existing Gen to create some modules for your private registry, make sure you don't use a namespace or a domain, right? That down the line might cause conflict. So use something that you have yourself. Maybe we can provide some prefix or something like that. I don't know. But please try to avoid that, right? So that requires rewriting some import paths, but that's then a small price to pay, probably, to prevent problems down the line. So in the solutions we've been thinking of on modeling Gen and user as modules, is that we would that each would live in a separate module. One is purely standardized Gen with no modification, and then you have a separate module that's based on that, very much like Docker from, basically, where you modify and tweak things, right? So that way you have many of the benefits. It allows maximum sharing, and again, the idea is that a user really typically should not have to create a Gen module, right? Or we should have tooling that makes it very easy to do, at least. So in that way, there's not that much difference. But feedback, if again, welcome if there's a specific use case of Gen plus use, or a specific workflow that people very much appreciate. So next steps beyond that, so we need to work out the self-contained MVS or island or dependency island solution. We're using different terminology here. Clearly, this is still in flux. We have some very good ideas about that, how to make this very clean and nice. I think even in a way that makes it, maybe going on a limb here, but that allows it to integrate very well with qmod tidy, right, and be able to generate mod files without having to tweak modules.q files by hand. Also to hone in on what the generation tooling will look like. So we have some ideas how that looks like. And then once we have a bit more handle on that, we can also get a better idea on what the migration tooling will look like, how we can help there, right? So my hope is that some of these things will actually be not as hard as they originally seemed, which means that we can maybe bypass and skip over a whole lot of this migration tooling and basically move to the end goal much more quicker than we actually anticipated. And of course, in parallel, work on the central repository will continue as well. As said, we need your feedback. Right, so we already got a lot of information about the problems that people face with these dependency islands that people want, but we can still see many scenarios. There's a lot of these problems are up for interpretation, like what is the real semantics behind it. So we need to get a bit more into that. So also, as people are playing, so there's also like the idea behind releasing the modules functionality as soon as possible, even without a central repository, is that people can run into these problems and give us feedback. Okay, this is really how we want to structure it, and these are, now we've thought about it a bit more and sort of are going, structuring these modules. This would be really great to have, right? For generation, there's a lot of unanswered questions, so we want to take this opportunity also to clean things up a bit. So to in the new documentation that I've been writing for Q, there's like some recommendation that for schema you should always use constraints, right? Like so exclamation mark or question mark. So the Go generating should reflect that, right? Like whether it's a required field, So yeah, we might have some different rules about when we consider something, like JSON marginable or not. Maybe we can include some more types or not, but we'll have to see. We need to write down backwards compatibility guidelines and when it's okay to break backwards compatibility, i.e. when there's a bug, right? But what do we consider a bug? So we have some very good ideas about that, but we need to communicate it better, right? So that people can also anticipate like what is proper form with generation and why do we make these generation decisions. As I said, there's a lot of things to say about that. Also, right now, when we generate from Go, there's the assumption that we interpret this as JSON. So this was probably the right choice because we've never had anybody that said like, oh, I want you to, to interpret the YAML text instead, or we want you to interpret the raw Go and ignore any tags, right? Field tags in Go. But theoretically, we could consider that, right? We could consider, for example, interpreting Go as Go instead of the JSON interpretation of it. So then then of course, we would like to have generation for any other kinds of, some of the other formats that we support and generation in general, right? Like JSON schema, so there's some unanswered questions there, like how do you deal? They don't really have a good packaging, versioning, dependency solution, right? Like, I mean, well, there is theoretically a good solution for it, but there is no standard for it and it's not prescribed, so nobody uses that solution. So same with OpenAPI, protobuf, and potentially supporting other languages. So, do people even want to support other languages like what we do in Go, and what would people want us to look like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then also would be good to know, as I said, we hope to skip, the fewer transitioning tooling we can write, the better. But like if we're moving too fast and if people say like, okay, this would really be helpful, of course we'd want to know about this. Also, as we're releasing new features like the central registry, we may release it first to, or generation or whatever, we may release it first to some users, in a very dirty state to get some early feedback, right? So if you say it would be really helpful to have this already, right? Like we can facilitate this early adoption, right? Because it's great if people are willing to deal with the bugs and with the things, then it's great to get that feedback early also. That's all I have to say. So any questions? I'm happy to answer.
So for the gen user directories, is the user one for making your own modifications to an existing module?
Yeah.
Just in that repo. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually, just from the way you described it.
Yeah, and we might have some. I mean, we had some ideas to existing package. Yeah, to be clear. Yeah, so we have some existing ideas on how also to deal with progressions of API, right? Like annotating deprecation and going beyond that beta alpha. So one thing we could do here also is if we generate and we say, okay, because a type uses a JSON Marshall interface, we really don't know what the representation should be. So we're saying it's stop, but we know it's a problem, right? We know that this is underspecified. So maybe we could use attributes also to indicate that, and then people that fix this could say this is a fix which is intended to have the intended semantics, right? Rather than something making it even more specific for my specific use case or something like that, right? There's other ideas around it, like that we could, some standardization around curated templates or promoting templates that are really fixing the generated templates, right? But I think, so if you think about it, a template that fixes a generated template, if it's purely a fix, right? And templates API progression is backwards compatible, then basically such a you could, if the let's say the user or the fixing module depends on a specific version of the module, you could progress that module dependency while still being able to apply those same fixes, right? Those fixes should work for every future version of the same major version. So that's a really nice property. Roger?
I mean, to be clear, I'm not sure. Do we have any use cases? Do we have any particular places where we will generate templates currently? Because currently, I think all our scenarios for generated code involve like generating definitions, right?
That's a good question. I've actually thought about that. In some cases, you could, in certain situations, you could interpret things as templates. For example, in Q, we consider it. So I think JSON schema is a good example. Or they do have default values, right? So in Q, we would consider it improper form to have default values in the main definitions. So one style guide suggestion that I've been toying with the new, how required fields work is to say, okay, your schema should have, so your definition should have only constraints, and then you can have an equally named non-definition that's based on that, which could introduce default values, right, or something like that. So we could argue once these guidelines are adopted that we could separate some schemas out from, or templates out from schemas. But yeah, that's a good question. David, you were first, but you're not sure if you want to ask a question.
Oh, yeah. I'm just not fully sure about the distinction between templates and schemas, because when I'm using generation, for example, I just pull from the Tecton project to get their schemas, and that's what I'm trying to pull. And so I'm then just generating my own Kubernetes objects using this schema from Tecton. And so to me, in a way, that's a template. So but I have overloaded terms here. So
yeah, that's sure. Yeah. No. So template, often typically what we mean by that. So schema really defines the shape of the data, but a template can be, well, I know if this field is 5, or that this field is always that other field plus 5. Right, so we could already compute it for you if we already know that that's the value. So it's basically convenience fields that automatically fill things out. That's one way to see it. And then another thing you could extract down the line, which we can't do right now. Actually, I have a prototype that does this to some extent. But what you could do is, if you can see, there is methods defined on certain Go types, right? Like that code can have assertion. So there's validation code that we can identify actually so far with 100% recall and precision in Istio, for example. What are these validation blobs of Go code? So we could extract constraints on the Go definitions, right, that apply. But of course, that doesn't have an API progression typically that might be backwards compatible. So we might have hoist those in a separate module also, and it's a very complex technology, right? So it's not so easy to necessarily do that accurately. So that would be a policy thing. So there's several other things we could extract beyond the raw schema that we could provide potentially.
Thank you for the explanation.
Yeah, Cedric.
Yeah, talking about those API versionings, I remember Sam Boyer. He created that email library, the Q library, to, I think, model versions. They were using it in Grafana to, I think, manage their plugins. I thought it was interesting in that, like, you would just define Q constructs in Q, model these different versions over time, and actually do the transformations. I think the Thema, like the Go command, would actually do those transformations. But it seems like you're describing features in the language that could probably achieve something similar. Is that correct?
I don't. So none of this, what we've presented here, are really changes to the language itself so far, right? So this is purely how modules compose. I'm not sure.
You said something about annotations, right?
Oh yeah, so the annotations already exist in the language, right? Like yeah, that's the attributes. But yeah, it has some overlap, right? And I can also imagine you could, yeah, this whole transformer thing from old to a new schema, right? I think is quite useful, but I'm not sure if we can do that automatically in any predictable way. But I could definitely imagine that the pattern which I set for patches, right, to make a generated module complete, that people could have several similar layers where they say, you know, I want to, you know, this is how you move this old API to the new. If you want to have both supported, right? I could imagine that people would provide that. And one nice thing about having all these links between all these different, well, using a Docker term, layers, right, of the same package, is that since we know what the sort of the semantics is between these things, right, we can start suggesting to users like, well, maybe you want to use this module instead, or maybe even allow mixing in several of these fixes, right, because the fixes might not be composable, right? So that might be that's an interesting thing, but that's sort of like my little thing, but we haven't really worked that out, right? So we'll have to see if that's really if there's a need for that.
I think the most interesting thing to me was that you would like with Thema, they define the lineage of these transformations in Q itself. So it's like that's also Q, but it seems like this is more done automatically for managing modules. I got to think more about the differences.
Yeah, my quick hunch would be that the Thema stuff would be so the transformations would be one of those layers, right? So that you express on existing modules, but like I don't know.
Okay, I'll think about it more.
Yeah.
I mean, I would just maybe in slightly different words. One of the features that we have talked about that would make Thema possible with modules is because when you're so for Thema, the transformations between the different versions, you're not necessarily talking about major version transitions, but also minor version transitions. And with MVS, you only ever get one minor version for any particular module. So if you want to write some translation code between those two minor versions, that's going to be hard if you can only refer to one minor version. This is where the idea of having like this kind of dependency island kind of idea, where you can say, okay, I've got this I can refer to this minor version and everything that it depends on without bringing that into as part of my current MVS scenario. So I don't necessarily. So you can essentially have more than one minor version of a given module, but I think, and then you could say I am actually referring to version 1.3.1 and 1.4, and write some transformation code that goes between those two. So that would make Thema possible, but it definitely wouldn't be automatic.
Okay. Can you remind me of an example application that would use, like, what's a use case for the dependency islands? Why do we need that again?
I mean, a classic example. A classic example is if one we came across very recently in a call was when somebody had a program that was deployed which was using some version of the Kubernetes types. So it was a Go program itself. And part of the Kubernetes config was the configuration for that particular program, which was, that program actually, understood one particular version of the types, and it was actually rather strict about those types. So it was actually rejecting unknown fields. And then that was all within the context of a larger Kubernetes configuration, which was a different version. So there's you actually wanted those two at the same time, because you wanted to say, this is the configuration for this program, and you wanted to check it against the version for that program. But you also wanted that in the context of a larger configuration where you have the entire Kubernetes configuration. And you can see how that might get, as configurations get larger and larger and the concerns get wider and wider, you want the ability to bring all those concerns under a single hood, which might well result in having to have several different versions of the same underlying module.
Would it, like in an example program, like each version of the Kubernetes API would be its own island?
Not necessarily. I think. Well, I mean, the feature has yet to be designed. But imagine that you could say in your module file, I want to say, because at the moment the idea is that you have a module and it has an associated major version, and each different major version can have its. There's only exactly one version of any minor version, one specific minor version for every major version, right? So you can have several major versions at the same time. But this is like one island. So imagine that you could say, let's pull in this particular version of this module as an island. Like, let's treat it as like a main module in itself, so that nothing in the module that it pulls in, none of those dependencies influence this current module. But you can still refer to the packages in that module, because they've got maybe you say that instead of you have a notation which can be used to refer to that module that is unambiguous. So you know when you're referring to this island version of the module, and you also know if you're referring to the same module, but it's just part of your regular MVS dependencies.
Okay.
And this is not just nice to have, or let's add some powerful features. I mean, configurations will really break if you don't have this. So, for example, in this first example, where you have this system that uses Kubernetes types, but is very strict about it, right? So if it has a field that it doesn't know, it will bill out. But in your same queue module, right, like you're basically communicating with another Kubernetes which is of a certain version, and you specify that version that's later. If you would increase that version of the other one, which MVS would normally do, then all of a sudden you have an inconsistent API, right? So it's important to be able to fix it. But it's actually quite useful also to, if you say, I want to compare two versions of an API and run some queue math on it, right? Like, is it subsumed or not? You can do that, right? Or if you have, for example, different deployment setups in different data centers with different versions of each, right? Like you can model that all accurately without having the versions shifting underneath you, basically.
Would the import path still be unique? I believe that's why we add the version to the import path now in the modules.
The idea is to have them be unique, yeah. So you would have some other annotation to refer to a specific island, basically.
Got it.
Or versions within that the island uses. There's also a particular use case that was very, peculiar, but a real life use case. So this is not, again, not something crazy. Yeah, and it's just a very, very recent thinking how to model this, right? But
sketching out makes sense. So for trying the module stuff, are people just building the latest queue off the main branch and using the commands, or like how specific are they writing modules? Are people writing modules?
Daniel, Roger? I believe so, but some people are at least experimenting with it because we're getting bug reports. So
you can publish right now with like
you can publish to a private registry. So if you start a Docker registry, then you can push to that and experiment that way.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah, but we want to have that in the next release so the next release will have the actual semantics with that we still support gen user and package in a same style as Go. Vendoring supports that. And that's
right. So as the code changes, you build a new the new program, run the registry, and test out the change. Got it.
Yeah.
I mean, So if you publish a module with a gen directory, if you then import it, it basically won't work. You'll have to create your own. You'll have to either copy the code or generate the code yourself in the importer.
Got it.
Daniel?
To be clear, if you want to test this stuff out with your own registry, you do need to build master, like they said, enable the modules experiment because that code is disabled by default, and then you set queue registry to your registry, like in the chat that I just shared. So it's similar to Docker, and then if your private registry is authenticated with Docker config JSON, then we pick up that configuration. So for example, if you use GitHub's Docker registry or Google Cloud's Docker registry, it should just work as long as Docker is configured with those.
Got it. Is this documented everywhere? Like it doesn't have to be an official, just like a markdown file. Probably good.
So if you run qhelp with the commands, we have qhelp environment, which is new, I believe, and it documents these environment variables. And then we have documentation for commands like mod init and mod publish and mod tidy and so on. But
Okay,
we don't
if I can
have
figure out from that, it's fine.
we do not have high level documentation yet, just because none of this is like ready for like wide use, right?
Yeah. When do you guys actually like start writing that? After you like kind of firm up everything, start making documentation just for my. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Any other questions?
I think I'm good. But
Excellent. Then I think we can call it a day and see you guys next time. And of course, we love hearing your feedback again.
good job
Um,
on getting the quick iterations on some of that stuff from last meeting. So
Awesome. Thank you.
appreciate everybody.
All right. See you next time.